Hey everyone, John here from the Cast and Spear podcast, and today we have back on the show Dustin McIntyre, the owner of Gatku and Crist pole spears, and he's going to put together a 3-part series, a clinic kind of, on how to make your own DIY pole spear. This guy has been building pole spears forever, has thousands of people using them around the world, and he wants to share what you need to think about if you wanted to make one yourself. So in this episode, he's going to cover what exactly is a pole spear, and what is the materials you should be using based on the type of fish that you're going after. But before we get started, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the podcast because I never want you to miss a future episode. And one more thing, if you find out at the end of this series that you're not really the DIY kind of person and just want to buy a quality pole spear and get in the water, just go to gatku.com and use promo code JohnCastandSpear, and Dustin will send you a free dive knife and some extra goodies. So big thanks to Dustin for hooking us up. But without further ado, please welcome back Dustin McIntyre.
I'm actually a strong advocate for making homemade gear. A lot of my favorite pastimes are making my own spear gun or making my own rigging on my kayak. And it's a lot of fun. And I'll have a lot of people contact me via email asking me about do-it-yourself pole spear, building your own pole spear. A lot of times the conversation starts out as, hey, hope you don't mind, or if you feel like you're sharing some trade secrets, I understand, and if you don't want to tell me anything, could you lead me in the right direction? I'm making my own pole spear. I don't know anything about length and size and weight and materials, and where do I get this stuff, and what things should I consider? Well, I'm going to go through a list. I actually wrote a list down of the most common questions that I have regarding pole spear build, as well as the most common attributes of a pole spear that most homemade builders will overlook. And then all of those folks who send me emails asking me these questions, I'm just going to refer them to this podcast here. So before we get started, I'd like to toot my own horn. I have been doing this for a long time. There's thousands of my spears out there that people are using. So I've been in the industry for a long time. I've been making what's known as the Ferrari of spears, the company called Gatku. And I also own another company called Crist Spears, which is another pole spear. It's a little bit different. It's more like the Dodge Cummins diesel or the Mack truck. And there are other products out there that are somewhere in the middle of the ends of that spectrum. The high performance speed versus more mass and heavy hitting punch. And yeah, some are going to outperform the others. You can't really have a Ferrari and a Dodge Cummins diesel at the same time, can you? Those are two totally different machines with sometimes two totally different purposes. And so, yeah, ask yourself, I'm going to build a pole spear. What am I doing it for? What am I targeting? What am I going to use this for? I'm going to be able to kind of go through some of that here today for you. Let's talk about the basics real quick. So a pole spear is a stick and rubber band, right? Probably been used for a long time, at least as a stick. And just to make sure we get the terms right, here on the West Coast, what is commonly known as a pole spear, we call a Hawaiian sling. When you hear somebody say, oh yeah, I use a Hawaiian sling, they're talking about a shorter pole spear, probably constructed of fiberglass, usually with a paralyzer or a 3-prong on the end. And then you might hear someone in Florida talking about a sling, and they're talking about something completely different. Okay, it's more of a glorified underwater slingshot that has a shaft, and they're throwing a shaft into rocks and crevices, targeting grouper or targeting hogfish or whatnot. Two totally different tools. They're both primitive, and both are triggerless devices. But today, what we're focusing on is the pole spear, which is the stick and rubber band. And of course, when you're making anything at home, you're modeling it after something that usually exists. At least some attributes will be similar to something that already exists. So let me share with you some attributes of the Gatku pole spear. So the Gatku is a hybrid pole spear. It's a little bit different from your more traditional spear in that it's composed of 2 different materials. So it's got solid aluminum throughout most of it, and in the front section, about 2 feet of it, it's a carbon graphite. It's a flexible carbon graphite. So there's other spears out there that are complete carbon graphite or a fiberglass, and they don't have the mass, right? Then there's other spears out there that are extremely heavy, rigid aluminum, sometimes 3/4 of an inch or 1 inch even in diameter. So Crist spears, which are about 3/4 of an inch in diameter, they are kind of in the heavier aluminum category. They weigh a bit more than the Gatku, but and in turn they require a lot more band power to get them to move as fast. So just to give you a reference, like the Gatku, because it's a little bit more lightweight, a little bit more sleek, only requires about 25-30 pounds of pull, whereas the Crist, depending on what length you're going with, could go, I think it starts at like 50 or 60 pounds of pull and goes on up to 90 pounds of pull. So for some people, that's a deal breaker. Like they don't want to have to hold that statically while they're holding their breath at the same time. They don't want that much. They don't want to be holding onto that much power. Just it's too uncomfortable for them, maybe. Then there's other spears out of there that are made out of a very rigid carbon fiber. Carbon fiber is not something you could go buy at Walmart, so that could be a pretty expensive build. Composition of the pole spear is pretty important. It's going to determine your weight or your mass, which is also going to determine your velocity. And let's talk about a more buoyant material. Wood. I would have thought about 10 years ago a wooden pole spear probably isn't going to outperform or isn't going to be kind of in the same class of the other modern pole spears that we're seeing. But I had my old friend Captain Frank. I showed him a roller puller that I made about 10 years ago, and he's like, I got an idea. I'm going to do something. And so he takes I don't know if it was mahogany or teak, but he took a piece of wood, and I had my doubts. I was like, yeah, Frank, I don't know if that's going to work. It might be too buoyant. I don't know how much punch it's actually going to have. But lo and behold, this guy he was a pretty decent craftsman. He went ahead and made what's called a roller puller, which has a pulley on the back that would allow you to have more band stretch, which more band stretch would translate into more penetrating range, more shooting distance, and so on. And so we took that thing out for a spin, and I was pretty impressed. It wouldn't have been my pick of materials to use, but he made it work. And I helped him machine the front end of it. I gun drilled the front, and we put a big fat 3/8 shaft kind of inside the front section of it to give it a little bit extra weight. So it may not have been positively buoyant when we were done because of the shaft, but it worked out. So there you have it. Wood can be used as long as you can get through your buoyancy issue. A lot of people are familiar with how to use wood already, or how to shape it, how to form it. Very easy to manipulate and machine. Not so easy if you chose titanium as a material. Also very expensive. Not very machinable. So that'd be another reason I would steer you away from exotic materials. It's just a little bit harder to work with, and you end up with a lot more of a loss if you were to screw something up, right? So stick with the easy materials. Aluminum works great as long as you're making the connections good and strong. I find the Gatku is solid 1/2-inch aluminum throughout most of it. Go with that. Once you go to 5/8, I know it's only an 1/8-inch difference in diameter, but when you're talking about solid aluminum, it's a huge difference in mass. Just bear in mind, the bigger you go, the more massive it is, and you're gonna be cramping up your hand trying to get that thing to power up. So try and keep it as light as you can for your application, I guess, is my suggestion. So there you have it. You have a small list of materials to use. Aluminum, whether it be solid aluminum or a tubing. Now you have to remember, if you're going to use a tubing, it's if you don't seal it, it's going to be infiltrated with water, and it's going to change a lot of the characteristics of how it travels in the water as well. You've got wood, carbon graphite, or like a fiberglass rod. There's also carbon fiber, the expensive route, and not necessarily the better route. A lot of people think, okay, I'm going to use carbon fiber because it's so strong and rigid, and that's a catch-22 or a double-edged sword. Sometimes you want flexibility. Like the Gatku, it's flexible in the front so that it kind of could withstand the blow, so to speak, where if you have something that's designed to be super rigid and it has a point blank impact or some sort of it hits a hard spot, something's got to give eventually. So if it's not absorbed, it's going to be damaged, bent, or broken. Those are things to consider too. So do you want it to be flexible? Do you want it to be rigid? Do you want it to be heavy? Which means if you're going to go heavier, you're going to, when I mean heavy, I mean more than, say, 3 pounds total with the head on there. If you're going to go heavier than that, you're going to need more band pull. If you go lighter, you're going to be able to get away with a more standard duty, latex pole spear rubber band. So those are all maybe the first things you want to consider. Do you need to go heavy? What type of fish are you targeting? Are you targeting tuna? Are you targeting, say, halibut in the sand? Are you targeting sitting ducks on the reef that don't require a whole lot of shooting distance or kinetic energy to get into them? There is a such thing as overkill here. So you would not want to bring a Ferrari to do a Dodge Diesel's job, right? Or vice versa. So you got to be selective. So once you decide what you're using it for, how much mass you need, then you could kind of go from there.
All right, that does it for this episode of the podcast. Hey, let me know what material you plan to use for your pole spear. Just email me at john@castandspear.com. I'm actually thinking about trying either a teak or mahogany wooden pole spear myself. My dad has a lot of experience doing woodworking, and I've helped him over the years build furniture for the house. And we have a pretty good garage set up, so maybe I'll try and do that and document the whole journey. A roller pole spear sounds really fascinating to me. But before you leave, if you could do me a huge favor, if you can screenshot your podcast app and text it to 3 of your fishing buddies, that'd be super helpful to help spread the word. Or better yet, share it on your socials. Just make sure you tag me at Cast and Spear so I can follow along with all your cool fishing adventures. And with that, keep those lines tight, everyone. See ya.